It's much easier to just take your Australian strategy, tweak it a little bit, make it a little bit more American, and you're going to see the results. It's just a fact that people literally prefer to be spoken to act, to buy in their own language. So yeah, recommendation there would just be small, start slow, and then it's going to show you a return, and then great. Maybe you jump from one market to 10. I'm Steph Rogers, Director of Retail from TransPerfect. And on this episode of Add to Cart, I'm going to talk about all the fun stuff it takes to truly make your brand a global success. Not just the buzzwords, not just AI, personalization, and translation, although they definitely do play a role. So let's dive in.
Welcome back to Add to Cart. My name is Nathan Bush, or Bushy, joining you from the land of the Turrbal people here in lovely Brisbane, Australia. And I am joined on our very special exclusive episode today by the lovely Rosa Willis.
Hello. Hi, Bushy. Thanks for having me back.
How'd you get in here?
Yeah, exactly. Left the back door open.
Welcome back. It's so nice to have you join us again. It's nice to just see your face pop in occasionally.
Yeah, I know. It's so fun. And I think especially when it's therapeutic for me, these conversations, because I get to sort of look back at where I've gone wrong and still looking ahead and all of that sort of stuff. So I was pumped to jump back into this episode in particular.
And Rosa, international, we're going to talk all about internationalization today. Is it something that you're thinking a lot about?
I think it's something we need to think about again. It's something that we were sort of burnt in the early years of doing. And now I think it's something that we're like, okay, we're back there. We're more mature. We know what we're good at, what we're not good at. So let's start to seriously think about international expansion again.
All right. Well, let's not just think about it. Let's talk about it. Today, we have the amazing Stephanie Rogers, who's the Director of Retail at TransPerfect. And this is a special exclusive episode, which is coming to you on a Wednesday instead of our typical Monday episode. Thank you to our partners at TransPerfect for bringing this to you. We're going to talk all things today localization. And what I love about this topic is that so often localization gets confused for translation, but it is not the same, as we find out today.
I totally agree. I think what we're going to go into is thinking beyond the direct website copy and actually start to think about, okay, what is your messaging? What's the concept? How do you need to reapply that concept in a different country? What are the logistics? We even get into labeling and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really valuable and if not inspiring podcast for brands in Australia looking to expand.
All right, so let's get straight into it. Thank you to our friends at TransPerfect for bringing us this episode. Here is Stephanie Rogers, Director of Retail at TransPerfect, joining Rosa and I for a chat on all things localization. Steph, Rosa, hello, welcome to Add to Cart.
Hello. I'm very glad to be here, finally.
You had to think about that. Are you sure you want to be here, Steph?
I had to think about it. You're right. This is not representative of how I feel about you both, so happy to be here.
We're very, very happy to have you here. Rosa, welcome back once again.
Thanks for having me back. I'm super pumped that this is the one that I'm making my return on.
I know. Well, most people won't even know you've been gone.
That's true.
No, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, we just got continuation of episodes.
I hear what you're saying. I don't make enough of an impact. So in this one, we're gonna make it memorable, okay, Steph? Go to places no one else goes.
You're still on probation, so we'll see how we go. Steph, thank you for joining us. We hung out at NRF in Singapore last year.
Yes.
And I loved hearing more around TransPerfect. And we're going to dive all into TransPerfect and the services and the tools that you offer there. But first, we're going to talk about internationalization, especially the opportunity for Australian brands right now. We are speaking in end of March, as it is right now. The world's in a bit of let's call it a shit show right now. How do you summarize the international opportunity in e-commerce for Australian brands as it stands today?
So I think, quite simply put, right, everyone loves Australian brands. It doesn't matter what. I feel like it sells itself if you say it's Australian brand. But I work with a lot of different retailers. So anywhere from fashion to beauty, footwear, the whole spectrum, wine as well. And I would say it really...
Your eyes lit up when you said wine.
Do you blame me? We spoke about this at NRF. Literally, I'm getting flashbacks. I even drank wine on stage. So
you did.
With Amanda, if you're listening, Amanda, I'm not going down alone. But I would say really the biggest opportunity is in APAC and then also in Europe. I think a lot of the time, the world is your oyster, really. But when we talk about international growth, it tends to follow a common path, right? Brands start in Australia, they go to the US, they go to the UK, and then they expand from there. And I would say for those brands that take a little bit more of a risk, let's say, and decide to try and target markets like Japan, like Korea, yes, it is much more risky from, put shipping and all that fun stuff aside. We're going to focus onto the marketing side of things, brand. It's risky, but I would say those two markets across APAC in particular, Korea, Japan, are the trend that I'm seeing Australian brands have real success. In Europe, by the way, it's always the same two top markets, Germany and France, just because of their nature, their size, and also from an economy perspective.
So is there kind of like a tiered structure here? Because I hear so many people just defaulting to the US and UK. Let's
Mm.
just treat New Zealand as part of Australia for now. Many are defaulting to the US and the UK. So, but are you saying actually there's better or more opportunity in Japan, Korea, Germany, France?
It's interesting. I would honestly say, look, there's nothing wrong with going the US route, right? I mean, I think the success certain brands are experiencing speaks for themselves. I would say it is definitely the best first start for brands that are going global because it's just easier from navigating, the cultural awareness, the marketing. It's hard enough to launch a brand in another country without worrying around how it's being perceived. And it's much easier to just take your Australian strategy, tweak it a little bit, make it a little bit more American, and you're going to see the results. I would say the key difference where brands really succeed, particularly in those sort of harder markets where in APAC, particularly Japan and Korea, I mentioned those two because they are without doubt the hardest markets to crack. But if you do, the rewards are going to be there. It's just a matter of it might take a little bit more effort to really make sure that you launch into those markets the way that you ideally should.
It's funny because I think, yeah, the default is everyone goes to either US or UK first. But I do think the smart brands, like I was it Koala back in the day before they even did that? They did Japan, didn't they? And they expanded there. And I remember that was like pretty rogue at the time. But I
Yeah.
do think now looking back or looking at where we're heading now with all the tariffs, like people are getting scared of going to the US. So it's like now's like better time than ever that people are like, okay, well, where do we go? And typically their channels, like their social channels, have more foreign audiences than either UK or US as well. Like, is that sort of how do you feel like people are making their decisions right now on what countries to expand to?
Yeah, so obviously that's a great question, right? Because I think no one would think it's a good business choice to just kind of spin a map of the globe, as fun as that would be, say we should launch here and then go for it. And I'm a big fan of making sure your approach is measured. I would say the typical and, the best advice I would give for a brand that can't really decide where to go and they know they want to go global, but they don't know where, is base it on the data that you're seeing. And by that specifically, if you're D2C, it's super easy. See where your traffic's coming from. Check the browser preferences of those searching on your site. Use that data to say, okay, we're getting, a bit of interest here in Europe. Maybe we just take, say, Germany as an example, do a bit of a 6-month pilot, do a bunch of fun localization initiatives to really test that theory out and then go from there.
It's interesting because we had Sam from Pyra on recently. And so he does a really cool, he's ex-Culture Kings and does kind of streetwear mixed with outdoor gear. Like way too cool for me. Like if I tried to wear it, I'd just look ridiculous. But he basically did that. He's like, it's working really well here in Australia and New Zealand. And then one day he just turned one of his ad sets or one of his campaigns onto a global market. And he was just like, let's see where it comes in from. And now he's kind of got specialized strategies for each region that showed up really well. And though I can't remember off the top of my head, this is where we need to pay a producer to sit here with us, but I can't remember off the top of my head where it was, but they were random markets. Like they weren't, because it's kind of cold outdoor gear. I was like Sweden. And he was like, I wouldn't have gone here first, but it kind of makes sense. And I'm letting the data lead me to your point.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to borrow actually an excellent point. So back at NRF last year, Amanda Green from Penfolds, she actually came up with this. She was sharing around how Penfolds actually made their choice as to which markets they wanted to really focus on from a localization perspective. And typically I've always said, and, based on the discussions with clients, you see there's interest. So then you follow the breadcrumbs and you invest more and then you get the return. But what she said really actually struck me because she said you can flip it on its head, right? So instead of going to a market once you see there's potential, yes, it's more risky, but you can focus on more of a loyalty led campaign. So instead of saying we'll wait and then we'll capitalize on the breadcrumbs, it's really around, okay, let's invest upfront in a region where we know there's potentially a little bit of interest, but we're not, we don't have a whole wealth of data to help us. And let's try and focus on that loyalty first, because ultimately the numbers speak for themselves, and that, of course, if you go down this path, you're going to win that customer, that brand trust. But if you flip it the other way and just go all in, maybe take a little bit of a risk on one market, ultimately that is going to set you apart. Right? Because imagine Australian brands are competing with the world. And this concept of localization is not new to anyone potentially outside Australia and New Zealand brands.
Penfolds is such an interesting example. Are they a client of TransPerfect?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, because Andrew and I we went to China to visit our manufacturers like a year or so ago, and we thought we were being so clever and bringing like Penfolds, and we
Okay.
all like a suitcase basically filled with Penfolds, and like as soon as we landed in the airports, it was like Penfolds friggin' owned in China.
You brought the supermarket brand.
Yeah, literally. It was like we met manufacturers and they were like, yeah, cool, Penfolds. Like, we know it's a great brand. We all have it at our house. And we were like, no, we should have just got friggin' Freddo frogs. But that was like so cool to see, like, such, you wouldn't have associated Penfolds with the Chinese market. At least I didn't. And to see it like really still having that kind of luxury, high quality, but like in China, like what a punt.
I mean, honestly, that's the thing. They've done an incredible job, right? I wish I could obviously take credit for this, but I will not because I must say, Treasury Wine Estates, right, as a company, their direction, they already know so much around their product, how it's going to fit in each market. Like, we're really there to kind of support with the execution, so to speak. From a strategy level, 100%, they've done an amazing job. Again, it's all about having, I guess, that information to guide and say, okay, how is this going to be received in each market? I would say the hardest part for a lot of Australian brands is, you don't want to lose your core Australian essence. It's very easy to say, cool, let's, translate it, chuck it into this market, maybe change some imagery. But then really the core essence of kind of the main USP, right, among others, but an Australian brand, it can be a little bit dangerous and there is that risk of losing that.
I want to dive into that because I think that's an important point. And you would see it, well, that's your job. So you would hope you see it a lot more than I do. But
Hopefully.
localization and transcription sometimes are treated as interchangeable, but are very different things. I'm keen to dive into that. But before we do, for context, Rosa, Crocked, are you international, thinking international? Because I'm keen to know where your headspace is coming at as
Yeah.
we're going to throw questions at Steph.
I think we have done like the classic journey of basically when we launched, we were first to market. Then we had actual friends rip us off in the UK. So then we were like, oh, we don't have the first movers advantage there. So let's race them to the US, which we should have just gone to the UK. So then Andrew and I literally packed everything up, moved our manufacturing, moved everything over to the US, realized the hard way that it's a totally different market. I think UK would have been easier for our like inexperienced retail brains at the time. So we wasted a lot of time and money in the US. Ended up having the same product go to a totally different market there, but it was huge. Like it was a huge revenue stream. Then obviously we moved back to Australia and then we just got ourselves caught in this like ridiculous time zone management of being kind of still a small business scaling fast with employees here. Our ads were being managed in the UK, running in Australia, and then it just kind of handicapped us from expanding anywhere else. And we were really naive. I think a lot of people are going into the US. Like, I think you'd almost have a better strategy going into the US, but targeting like a Spanish speaking audience or targeting more of like a niche community in a country that's not going to be so hard for you to understand the logistics of. But like thinking that way, because we assumed it would be much easier than it is. I assume, you hear that all the time with the US, or maybe we were just dumb, but is that common?
Sounds like the first problem you had was just shit friends.
I
Yeah,
reckon.
we glossed over that. That's traumatic. But you're smiling now, so.
Yeah, exactly. We could do a whole Pottery Wars podcast, guys. It's literally a dirty business. But anyway, but yeah, is that like, is the US, in your experience, harder for especially Australian brands to break into or not? Is that not a theme?
That's a great question. And I must say, when I honestly first started, at TransPerfect many years ago, I was a little bit also, I wouldn't say naive, but I just didn't think about it, right? You think localization, you think translation, you think English speaking markets must be pretty simple. I would say the biggest pitfall I see brands making is they wait to think about localization until only when they hit those non-English markets. So I work with a lot of clients who, similar to sort of your tale, they are Australian brands. They started working with US agencies. Obviously, because you can't be in two places at once, that's a lot of travel time. You're trusting that you're outsourcing your brand, right, to an agency that you just kind of hope knows the market. Now, of course, to an extent, that's what you have to do. But I would say if we put aside this concept of translation, when it comes to English, things like localized SEO, things like AEO in this whole age, but that's a whole other podcast topic. But, things like realizing that even cultural marketing, right? The obvious ones like imagery, fine. Obvious ones like holiday periods, how you build your campaigns. Those I would say are ones that, any good agency would be able to help you with. But really it's about recognizing that it's not just changing a word here and there to an American spelling, right? It's how do you keep 80% of your core ethos, but then make sure that you're tapping into all these little cultural nuances. And particularly from a competitor perspective, I mean, as you know, right, the competition is huge in the US. And it doesn't mean that your product isn't the best or that, it can't be up there. But I've seen some pretty huge statistics. Like I'm talking, say, 300% uplift from customers focusing just on the US who did things like localize their keywords properly. So not just chuck it into Chat GPT and say, okay, what are people searching for? But just that little extra effort, and it doesn't cost a millions of dollars at all, but that can have a very real impact on your revenue. So I would say biggest advice, just approach it like you would honestly any international market. Do your competitor analysis. Don't just assume that, your current agency also in Australia, as we have incredible agencies here, obviously, but you really do need that local knowledge and expertise.
Completely agree.
So when a client or a potential client comes to you for the first time, Steph, and they're like, we're thinking of going to the US, UK, maybe we'll just skip straight to Korea, wherever we're going, where are you starting from? Like from a TransPerfect perspective, obviously you mentioned there that we hope that the shipping's sorted out, that the product safety, the regulations, all that is sorted. I know you come more from the marketing side,
Mm.
but do you have kind of like a checklist to go, starting point? Let's look at this first.
Yes, we do. And I think it's a good point to note here. So TransPerfect has been around, actually, it's the same age as me. So I'm not going to go into what year it was founded. It's quite ironic.
21 years old.
20 for just over 2 decades. Thank you for that. We've been around for a while, right? And I would say translation was the core of what it started with. So our founder really focused on translation. Now, as we all know, and it's something that I wanted to just address because I find it quite a fun topic, the translation industry per se, of course, it's not what it used to be, right? AI, all this fun stuff. So as a company, TransPerfect might have started off as translation, but honestly, we've morphed into basically what I like to call just a facilitator of our clients' global success. And that is a lofty concept. I appreciate that. But when I typically meet for the first time with a client, I understand, their goals, what data points they have. I listen to, okay, we want to go here, we want to go there. But then really my focus is on asking them, have you thought about every single aspect of that customer journey? So for any sort of product that's beauty, fashion, if we start at the very first end of that customer spectrum, right? You're launching into a market, there's the regulatory and compliance element. It's boring, but it's necessary. So things like literally very, very dry, but label translation. It's not just translation, it's compliance. Canada's a great market because people think, oh, like French, whatever. We can just use French for France and it's
Yeah,
fine.
no.
No, right. And now, thanks to Bill 96, a piece of legislation, they've actually, everything has to be bilingual. Like it's a regulatory law. So if you don't do it, then you're in trouble. I spoke to a skincare brand, Australian sort of skincare brand that did go through a few challenges, I would say, because in Korea, for example, things like lightening, brightening, descriptive words on how your product works, you can't say something is brightening because the literal translation is that it lightens your skin, which is a claim. Again, all this minutia that actually has quite a real impact on whether a product is pulled or it's successful. So I like to ask about that. Are they aware of that, first of all? And then it's onto the fun stuff, right? Digital marketing, localized SEO. What is their strategy? If you translate your website alone, yes, it's important for D2C brands, but this money, time, investment in translating the website, I've seen it time and time again. It doesn't work unless you have those paid, organic, all those digital marketing elements that actually drive the traffic to your site. So Following along that spectrum, yes, of course, the big website, it's always a heavy content piece. And every client is a little bit different, right? But that's where things like AI come in. I know we're going to chat about that later, but that's really where the AI piece is important. And also the technology behind it, right? How many product SKUs do you have? This is not being done through Excel spreadsheets, let me tell you. And then finally, you've got, things like customer support. So if you're a French speaking customer and you visited the website, great. You bought your product and then your post purchase email is in English. Look, most people, I'm making an assumption here, of course, might be able to speak English, but as a consumer, it's very jarring, right?
Yeah.
You've got this email and you're like, oh, okay, well, thanks for this purchase. But if you're going to keep spamming me with these emails in English, I'm probably not going to come shop again with you.
Also makes you think, "Oh, this is like, oh, this really is run from Australia. It'll take too long. It'll take too long to like" they just make all these negative assumptions on the brand. Anyway, like shipping and all that sort of stuff.
Can we just split Canada into the two countries that it really is? Like, it'd be a lot easier.
Canada is a nightmare because you think, "Oh, we're gonna go into North America. We'll have our, like, hub in, the in America," and then you're like, "Far out, we've gotta have totally different labeling for the 2 countries." And then we're like, "Oh, we give up on Canada," but then it would have been a really
And that's such a shame.
yeah.
Exactly. And it's funny because, again, I can speak of this now, right? Because it's my job. But I must say, I also, like most people, make the assumption, okay, well, English is sort of the business language spoken in majority of the countries that, the brand might be active in. But it's not even about you should translate for diversity and inclusion. Yes, of course you should do that. And yes, you should do it for the business reason. But it's just a fact that people literally prefer to be spoken to act, to buy in their own language. So if you ignore that, or if you choose like a really crappy, like cheap Google, then you're really running the risk to your brand as well, not just regulatory.
I like that you've just thrown down the gauntlet to Google, calling them crappy and cheap Google.
Sorry, at this point we have New Zealanders after us, Canadians after us, potential ex-partners. What? This is dangerous already.
We've taken the Donald Trump strategy of globalization here.
I was gonna ask that, Steph. So, like, it's not as simple as, say, brands coming to you and they're like, "Cool, I've got this product. This is my website. I want to launch in Korea." And it's not as simple as you guys just going like, "Great, we'll take your assets, we'll translate them, we'll make sure the message is the same." Is TransPerfect also basically saying, "Cool, that's your message here. That message doesn't work here. Here is how." Like, is Perfect involved in the messaging rather than just like the distribution of the like localized content? Like, is that what localization means?
It's a great question. So think of TransPerfect as over the last couple decades, we've swallowed up digital agency, media agencies, because our goal is really, to put translation to the side and be more of a consultant. Because a lot of our clients, we're not here to say Shopify is terrible or all those tools that have their in-house
Thank God.
capabilities are bad. Not at all. Well, we're partners like Shopify, Adobe, Salesforce, Sitecore, we partner with all because at the end of the day, everyone now has an AI capability, right? Our goal is not to say that's terrible, don't use it. It's more like we're able to tell you what is going to actually move the needle. So to
Mhm.
your point, yes, of course we offer translation, but we also offer the technology framework behind it to facilitate your website to be translated into 5 different storefronts, to work with your Shopify instance, to work with your Salesforce commerce instance, to plug into your marketing stack. To your point, actually have, if you want a team of experts to say, yep, your Korean strategy should be XYZ. Things like if you're optimizing for Google in Korea, why people don't use it? If you're, is it Naver, WeChat in China, for example? So we have the technology. Think of it as 2 buckets, really. Technology to underpin that framework, but then also the people, the services, the creatives to actually make that happen. And it's all designed to be pick and choose. Like, I think I know better. I mean, we can all sort of understand the Australian retail community. We all know each other. It's important to trust. We all have partners. And I always genuinely say this, and maybe I shouldn't because my goal should be, of course, everything, like, etc., revenue. But I must say, my goal is never to say to a client, your Australian agency is terrible. You shouldn't work with them. We can do it better. Because I don't think that's true. Like, our goal is to just work with the ecosystem and just add the international element where it's helpful versus completely try and rewrite the script.
I think it's okay to do that. Like, I tell other people that podcast is horrible. This is the best one.
Do you?
No, I don't.
But honestly, agencies, like, I think you have to have a default, like, skepticism to get the most out of any agency, even when they're the best. I think they have to.
Yeah.
And I think it's really smart that TransPerfect is all of those things. Like, you're the strategic partner, your logistics, as you said, you're, yeah, actually localizing, you're distributing. I can see or two that you have like media as well, which means I
Yes.
assume you would have then partners with like the advertising, like out of home. Like, I just feel like even understanding this and understanding that people's default would be like, like this billion-dollar industry is gonna get knocked around by AI. You're almost like, okay, I wanna know that my partner is using AI to be as efficient as possible because I don't want their inefficiencies to be passed down through expensive costs to me. But if I don't have to be the one who's mucking around with AI and I know that you guys are and you're backed by experience, why would I try and do this myself? That just feels, yeah, so dumb and so expensive if you guys are doing it.
It's a great point.
Are you going for a job interview or are you interviewing on a podcast here, Rosa?
Nathan, help me find the question in that. What's my question in that? Maybe how are you using AI? Because we're all itching to talk about it.
Can we save you there, Rosa? I actually had a story because I do want to come back to AI, but it's too early to talk about AI. And I was just trying to avoid
I
it.
appreciate you, Rosa.
Oh my goodness. My producer fees have gone up double. Like the editing fees in this podcast have gone up double since you've joined. I wanted to pick up on what you were saying there, Steph, around the localization, because I've been working with a client in the past couple of years and they've got a European team and they've got instances across France, Germany, UK, South Africa, which is classed as Europe, and
As
Belgium.
a South African, I'm offended.
Well, that time you got offended and didn't offend everyone else.
Well,
Um,
oh.
One of the things that their teams really struggle with is that when you've got this brand identity and you have global brand campaigns, it's not even just the language, it's the concepts that don't work sometimes. So when you are having concepts that rely on a metaphor or a cultural moment that just don't translate into other countries, even though you assume they're global, do you have that often? And do you have to help teams navigate those situations for global brands?
It's a great example. And again, not to bring this to AI, but the biggest question I have is clients go, "We can use AI for it." And then they see what they get and they're like, "No, we can't." So I would say obviously TransPerfect on a global level, right? We work with some of the biggest, I would say more creative brands out there. So you've got like Lululemon, Nike, all these very, colossal giants that can't really afford, no one can, but they particularly can't afford to mess up when it comes to something like a mistranslation or a cultural nuance gone wrong. How you typically approach that is honestly kind of the old fashioned way through actual creative individuals in language. So, without diving super into the weeds, because no one cares except me around the different levels of translation, yes, of course, you have translation, but then you have things like creative adaptation, you have transcreation. Literally, as you have your English marketing specialists making up ideas, we have access to those people in language. So for a brand that says, hey, we want to launch this campaign into Germany and into Japan at the same time, can you help us adapt this idea? We would do something like, the ideas you want to get across a certain brand, but it wouldn't be word for word at all. It would literally be sitting with the team, immersing yourself in the products, trying to understand what your source English creative team wants to get across, and then really just adapting that from scratch. Bit more of a complicated process than your typical, like, just translate it, but super important today. Yeah.
I think, and that's my lesson in this as well, is that you've actually got to get the localization happening early on in campaign and idea generation, not try and tack it on at the end and go, great, we've done it for the US or we've done it for Australia, and then we'll translate it everywhere else. It's like, actually, no, let's think about it from a localization level first. And does this concept actually go out? Because we can't just rely on translating the language to bring it into other countries.
Yeah, and the funny part, I mean, you can really simplify it, right? Like I often say, at the end of the day, it's about money. So clients will say, "Hey, we have X amount of money. We want to do all this stuff." I'm like, "Okay, I want to do that for you. But what you want, you're just not going to get it for that amount because you can't just run everything through AI and call it a day." And so I would say the way businesses should actually think about it is they've spent decades, years, money investing in their English speaking, in this instance, Australian team. Now, if they really want to do this properly and not outsource to a partner like TransPerfect or any other, localization partner out there, they would just have to do this in every single country. How expensive and insane is that, right? Imagine hiring a Spanish marketing team, a French marketing team. Of course, if you're a Lululemon of the world, you can do this. But for a lot of Australian brands, that's just not feasible.
Just the HR complaints alone.
Oh, glad I don't work with you. No.
Help,
I
help.
don't know how far we can push it on this thing. I'm sorry.
So basically, if you go with a partner like TransPerfect, there is a world in which you don't need, because we obviously tried to be like do it on the budget, which means DIY. We thought, okay, we'll hire like our BDM on the ground in the US, we'll build our local team.
Mm.
But essentially, had we gone through a partner like this, where we wouldn't have had to do that, and we wouldn't have gotten caught up in the taxes and the healthcare and all the crap that ended up drowning us rather than figuring out how to like expand more in the US. Like, is that what you see? Do people basically come to TransPerfect as a step one to before then building like head offices in these countries? Is that typical for Australian brands?
So, firstly, I'm really sorry it's such a bad time in the US, like, because my answer to this makes it seem like this is what you should have done. So, definitely not, but appreciate you sharing that. I would say it de-risks it, right? Because ultimately it's a way to test it out. Like, it's not like if you decide to work with us, by the way, it's not also that you have to sign up $500,000 and get everything. It's not like that at all. The entire reason for being at TransPerfect is that we're designed to really be pick and choose depending on what you need. Like, if you want to say a 6-month targeted campaign in the US addressing XYZ, even at a state level, however you want to personalize it, we can do that. Then I would definitely say it's a good option to de-risk the investment before you take that next step.
That makes sense. While we're talking about the commercial model, I'm interested. Is it the traditional kind of agency commercial model, or how does it work?
My favorite question. And I wish I could say one number for you or a very simple explanation, right? The classic, how long is a piece of string? No. So it very much depends on our client's use case, but I will illustrate this with an example. So I work with a major appliances company here in Australia, and they came to us, and we can support any size of customer. So if you are literally just in one market and you need help with your labels, great, we can do that. If you are a giant enterprise company in 25 markets, that is sort of our sweet spot, because again, we are a tech focused company, right? Our sweet spot is in the translation and services, but it's really in the framework. So what I mean by that is, either customer out of the box integrations into your CMS, into your PIM, into whatever marketing platform you're using. So mid to enterprise level customers is really where I would say they find the most value. But really our core, I would say, reason for being from like a tech perspective is around simplification of the language effort. I'm going on a tangent, sorry, and I don't want to because there's just so much I could talk about it. So bring me back.
It's not like a salesperson to avoid a question when you say, how much is it?
Yeah.
It's so inbuilt in me that I'm like, oh God, now I'm talking about value. No. So cost. If, for example, you want to translate your website, I mean, very simple. So our typical, we don't have packages, but for say any client listening who's on Shopify, who is in, say, they're actively selling in anywhere from 2 to 10 storefronts. Maybe you're using Shopify Markets, which by the way, again, is a great first go. I actually recommend people to turn it on, have a go. So let's say we'd recommend website translation, core offering plus digital marketing. From a cost perspective, your website would be using our technology called Global Link Web. It's a JavaScript injection. There's no sort of heavy integration or dev work. And really, your website can be up and running in as little as 4 weeks. The cost for that is your typical software as a service, right? So there'd be a monthly fee associated. And what this fee looks like is dependent on things like the number of languages, how big your website is, how much AI you want to use, because with more AI, the cost comes down, but there is that concession to quality. And then, of course, the cost to launch your site. Super simple, nothing hidden. From a digital marketing perspective, we do indeed act like a more of a traditional agency because essentially we're an international marketing agency for that piece. When it comes to things like different API connectors, again, it just depends on the level of complexity. So I have clients that we currently support them with, maybe 5 to 7 different connectors into CMS, PIM, etc. Obviously, yes, the dollars do come with that. But, for our smaller clients who just want that base, let's translate the site, let's translate it well, let's add some digital marketing, then, you're looking at anywhere from, say, a couple of thousand up to like maybe 50, 60K. Again, this is very finger in the air
Yeah.
ballpark,
Oh, good on you for putting something out there.
putting it out there.
Yeah. No, I think that all makes sense. And I like that there's that mixture of essentially buy on demand and then the agency model as well. It makes a lot of sense. Rosa, did you have like a question around AI or something?
I'm thinking maybe we start a drinking game, and every time someone says AI, we have to take a shot.
Okay, this wasn't in the brief, but I think we should incorporate it.
We'll be right back.
And yeah, a new add to cart tradition. I don't have a question about AI. What's AI, Nathan? No, no, I do. Obviously everything is centered around AI, but I wanted to understand, like, obviously our listeners are from a broad range of industries. And I wanted to know, like, for how long you've been at TransPerfect, is there an industry that you see people in Australia and you're like, you're so dumb? Like, it's already been proven by Australian brands that you succeed here. Like, go. Like, you talked about appliances, but do international markets trust our beauty? Do they trust our furniture? Do they trust
And
our
Steph, why is the answer pottery?
ceramics? Yeah, like, is there an industry that you're like, you're just dumb, you're leaving money on the table by not expanding into X market?
So no one is dumb for the records of this, but I do understand what you're asking. And I must say, from what I see across clients, beauty, something about people just picture clear white sand. You know, they didn't think about the spiders and the snakes and all that stuff. But I would say beauty in terms of things like sunscreen, and sunscreen is its own category, right? Because anyway, for lots of dramatic reasons that I think we all know over the last kind of year in the news and whatnot, but sunscreen is such a highly regulated category. But because it's Australian, people just inherently trust, hey, we get sunburnt. You know, there's a hole in the ozone layer. We know that. But I would say if you're a beauty brand, and it doesn't matter how small you are, that's the thing. 100% there's a market. There's always a market, but for things like beauty, for some reason, people just love it.
It's so true. I would buy the water from Sweden if they sold it here. Like, whatever they're drinking, I'll
Actually,
have.
I say
What
that.
if it's not the water in Sweden? What if it's something else?
Like, what?
I don't know. I've never been there. I think it's a far jump to assume it's the water.
I don't know, they're drinking something. They're all beautiful, and it's painful.
You reminded me of something, which is my friends from Germany, Hong Kong, and the US. So if you're listening, Petal and Pup was the number one brand that none of these girls know each other, but every single one of them was like, oh my God, Steph, when they heard that I was moving back to Australia, they were like, can you send us stuff from Petal and Pup? And so that's actually how I found out about Petal and Pup, I must admit. So again, I would say yes, beauty is one, but then also there's so many really great, Australian fashion brands like Dish, for example. I'm now
Yeah.
obsessed in a convert. But yeah, you can't really go wrong, but that's the trend that I see. And
Yeah.
ceramics.
Yeah. Obviously, no, I think it's not ceramics.
How do you leverage the Australian brand, like without it being dinky dye Australian, whack a kangaroo on the front and some beaches? Like Petal and Pup's a great example of people obviously know where the brand was founded and originated from without it being like without it holding back to being a global brand. How do you get that mix?
Look, that is honestly a hard question because I don't want to speak on behalf of any of my clients. I would say it's around tonality. Like what I've seen, and regardless, I mean, I'm just thinking now of clients, really e-commerce, like fashion e-commerce, but also things like appliances, things like wine, things like skincare. It's around the actual translation of it. Like it's not so much, it's around the wording choice. And again, I work with some, if I think of like really luxury high-end fashion brands, right? The way that they translate is going to be different than if you're selling, I don't know, jumpers. But it's really sort of the Australian ethos of it can be beautiful, it can be luxurious, but it's also practical. I feel like that comes across in a lot of messaging from my clients. And sometimes it can be hard, right? Like I think Monday Hair Care is a great example, like Monday Days Beauty. So they're New Zealand, Zero New Zealand company, obviously. But it's so interesting because especially when you've got different product lines for different verticals and audience segments, right? Some has to sound whimsical. Your other products have to sound a little bit more practical, or these small nuances make a difference. But I think the core ethos of, good ingredients in the case of, say, skincare and shampoo and whatnot, good quality materials, kind of the Australian way of life that comes across.
I noticed that you didn't say humor because
Hmm.
I think that would be a real, like, I think of brands like Better Beer, and I wonder if they're always gonna be stuck to this, like, Australasia market because, like, how would that, like, typically Australian sense of humor translate? Like, yeah, I wonder if you're a humorous brand or your brand relies too much on that, if that would ever work, or are there any examples that you can think of brands who have translated humor?
I mean, honestly, like quite honestly, I can't think of many off the top of my head that have tried to do that purely because that's like even a level above transcreation because humor, like again, as a German, right? Like I am efficient, I am process driven. I am somewhat fun because I'm also Australian/South African, but I can tell you certain jokes, like I just know. Like my grandparents, if I could pitch them some of the stuff I come across, like the clients send and things, they would be like, but we don't understand. Like, why? And even my beloved German friends back in Berlin, I show them something fun or I send them this ad and they're like, But why? Why would I wear that if it's like 45 degrees? I need to be in the shade with my hat, and like I need more than sunscreen. I need like a full, you get where I'm going with this. There's not really, and I pick on Germans because I can. I won't pick on anyone else, but I think there are limits.
I like that though, because it's something you've got to think about from a brand or a positioning factor right up front. Your examples are really good, Rosa. Like I haven't thought about it that way.
Yeah, like I wonder if your Australian brand relied on humor, would you have to give that up in your international markets, or could your product stand on its own 2 feet without that?
I mean, the Germans wouldn't drink better beer to start with. They just throw it in the
That's
gutter.
true.
Yeah, 100%. Could you imagine, like, that marketing and those boys being able to translate that? Like, it would just be impossible.
One other thing that I just thought of, Steph, that we don't even have in any show notes, so my apologies straight up front. We've talked a lot about website translation and campaign translation. Social media is an interesting one, especially with so much reliance on content creators and UGC. And I'm working through this at the moment around every country needing their own content creators and influencers because people want to connect with like-minded people in their country. Do you do any work in that space to help the positioning and almost like localization of social identities?
Yeah, that is a great question. So we do seed influences in language. It's something that falls under our digital division, and it's something that personally I've worked on just a handful of projects because it tends to be focused more in, fair enough, North America as well as obviously our European regions, and we have teams all over the globe. But I would say it's something that has recently, and recently meaning in the last, say, 2 to 3 years, really picked up because you're right. It is such an important lever for so many brands, but there's so much to consider in this whole thing, right? But it's super interesting and definitely an area that I would say is only growing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
A last sort of question that I really want to know is, you've obviously heard now about my failed attempt. It wasn't failed, actually. It was very fruitful once we got it right. But what do you think, like, what time frame do brands need to truly give it in a new market? So, like, when they come, they land, they expand, how long are they in market for before the penny starts to drop and momentum starts to build?
Look, if you want the best case, this is what you should do playbook, which I think 1% of the world would follow, is you should think about this before you launch into market. It shouldn't be an afterthought. Now, reality is it just doesn't work that way, right? A lot of, again, particularly Shopify clients, they just say, oh, let's turn this on and let's see what happens. Nothing wrong with that. It is what it is. I would say that ideally, the one risk you have if you think about this as an afterthought, you only really have one shot to properly launch into a new market, right? And it doesn't mean that you can't still be successful if you don't. That's the thing. The world doesn't end. But it's more like if you get all your ducks in a row and then launch, great. But if you've never done it before, I get it. You wouldn't even know where to start. I would say as long as you really focus on the digital and the website, if you start selling it with an English storefront, if you start running your English ads, you're just not going to have as much traction. You can still recover from that. They're still going to love your brand if you've got a good product and good branding. But I would say ideally you don't want to be more than a couple of months in a new market before you start turning on all these activations, because it really is just like personalization, right? Like people, my favorite pet peeve, so to speak, is that people talk about personalization. So they're investing all this energy. So you're sending personalized emails, but then they forget to turn on the most personal piece of all, which is actually speaking to their customers in language. So no time frame is too late at all. It's just a matter of what is the best. And what's gonna see you the most return?
Steph, this is amazing. I've learned so much from you. Thank you.
Don't lie.
And Rosa, you were here, so thank you.
Want to know my last question: when is TransPerfect going to introduce trans loans? And so then we can get some capital to expand.
Oh my god. I'm gonna take that straight to our CEO.
You absolutely should. The amount of money, like when we looked at UK, we're like, right, it's going to cost $1 million to export. Come on, trans, just like put the ticket on it all.
That's so funny. I will get back to you on that.
End of my job at TransPerfect.
I was about to say, Rosa, based on some of the decisions you've shared today and some of your stories, I think they've immediately declined any loan application from you.
Use me as the what not to do.
But on that, Steph, if we've got brands who are really successful in Australia and have been thinking about expanding international or are in the early stages of it, what are the signs that you think they should look out for to know that they're ready to start localizing for each market to get started?
Do you mean in the sense of, they're already there and then what are the type of signs they're seeing?
They're either experimenting or thinking about going.
I would say do your competitor analysis. Again, it doesn't matter if it's with us or someone else. Do your competitor analysis because you have to start there. It sounds boring, but it is true. I've seen so many times where brands get too excited. And of course, then you've got angry CFOs who are like, where is my return on investment? And it's all just because they honestly just didn't do the research to understand, like, is this even a good target market? So do your competitor analysis, do your product fit, and then start small. As I say, that's obviously where I come in and help. But really, it doesn't matter who you're working with, if us or another partner, you just want to make sure that you take it slow, measured. Yes, there will be ROI, I can tell you now, but you don't have to believe me yet, right? Like we've got the numbers to back it up from global clients. But if you don't have those numbers and you still need to build that trust, start small, do a pilot, do 6 months, 8 months, 4 months, whatever you want, and then just follow those breadcrumbs. You don't have to be in 10 global markets across every marketplace, web, digital, blah, blah, blah. I don't know many companies who'd be able to afford that to do it properly, right? And then you risk just doing a bit of a crappy job and you're kind of back to the drawing board. So yeah, recommendation there would just be small, start slow, and then it's going to show you a return and then great. Maybe you jump from one market to 10, that's how you work it out.
Love it. Yeah, good. Well, Steph, if you've triggered something in people today and they want to know more around the TransPerfect opportunity, probably not the hate mail if you're from Google or other places, but
Google Germany, Canada, New Zealand. You can direct that to no reply at add to cart.
and you will get no reply. But Steph, if people actually want to contact you to discuss this further, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Honestly, I would say LinkedIn would be the best approach. Obviously, I could give my number out here, but I don't know. I think I'll just keep it to LinkedIn because I don't want to get all the spam callers. No, but I think I would obviously love to chat to anyone who's interested in doing this. And I think one point that I honestly did want to sort of end on from my side is if you're listening and you're like, okay, but we're using, any one of the great, well, AI plugins out there, we're using Shopify Markets, whatever, that's totally fine. Like in my opinion, I genuinely feel like every solution has its place. If you've never localized before, why would you go crazy and invest all this? You have to learn for yourselves that you're comfortable with it. And then when you're ready to take the next step and do a proper strategy, meaning all these channels I spoke about, the AI, the human, the creative, all that fun stuff, then people should feel comfortable to then come to us. Like I genuinely, as much as again, this is probably not what I meant to say, but I feel like I do empathize with brands because you have to go on your own learning curve. Yes, someone might use us, but maybe you're just not at that stage of your journey yet. So there's nothing wrong with whatever you're doing now. And if you ever just literally want to have a chat and see like, okay, this is how like Aloe Yoga does it, this is how Sony does it, then I'm probably the least salesy salesperson. Hopefully any clients listening can probably tell the truth. Like, of course, yes, it's my job. Like I'm meant to tell you this is great and it is great, but you have to be at the right place, I think, and ready to talk about it.
I think what you were implying is that it's like a rite of passage to go and do it yourself and kind of fumble and burn yourself a bit as a brand looking to expand. You almost have to, and then you truly understand the value of like a TransPerfect partner. I put my hand on heart and say, even if we went back time, we would try and do it ourselves again, right? Because you just think you can. So I agree with you. I think that's really good advice is like that you guys are saying, go try it and then call us.
Get some scars.
Look, I'm going to say yes and take this opportunity, as I always do, to remind everyone that I am a spin instructor because what you just said there around like failing, trying again, and then I honestly think that is like that's just a motif for life, right? I mean, yes, the stakes are higher if it's your brand and it's dollars being lost here, but ultimately, as I like to say, like you don't know what you don't know. And so you can learn from others and best practices, but ultimately sometimes you just kind of have to figure it out for yourself. Ideally not fail. Ideally the risk isn't that high, but yes.
Ideally, just fail enough so you've got enough money to pay TransPerfect when you fail.
Wow, this is such I don't even know why. Thanks, guys. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot around web, digital, customer service, everything that's like customer facing. But is there anything else that you see businesses making a mistake on that's often overlooked that's really critical to business as they're expanding internationally?
It's a great question. And I think all of that great stuff that we've talked about is super important. But a main area that's often, I would say, forgotten is internal localization initiatives. What I specifically mean by that is sales training. And again, I've seen this happen. So I'd say Aesop is a great example of an Australian retailer, obviously, who's great, global success story. And when it comes to training of their salespeople in market, that's a huge area because if you think about it, you can do all this external great stuff. But if you're a brand that has people on the ground, whether it's in stores, department stores or actual physical stores globally, trying to sell your product and bring that across, how are you training them? Because particularly for Asia, right? Korea, Japan, China, the level of English penetration, it's just lower, first of all. So you're trying to explain to your salespeople, but then also expecting them to explain it to their local consumer in language. And so training from an e-learning perspective, so things like LMS modules, all the stuff that you usually do when you onboard to a new company, right? That's actually a huge focus of what we do. And so I would say my piece of advice is if you're in that situation and you have this staff on the ground selling your product in any capacity, make sure that you don't focus all your attention on that great external customer stuff and forget the importance because ultimately your people are the best representation of your brand. So you have to make sure that you're equipping them in the best way possible to really spread that message on.
Thank you so much on just being so open with your information and sharing what it looks like and all the different stages and just giving us a bit of reality, I think, about that internationalization journey for many brands. I think we'll have a lot of founders sitting here listening to us go, I've made that mistake and I wish I knew this before. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me. I genuinely have really enjoyed this.
And Rosa, good to have you back. Thank you for sharing your story too.
Thanks so much, guys. Awesome chat. I don't know if that conversation's got me high, bushy, or if it's your fluoro background in my eyes, but I really enjoyed that. I thought it was really, really fun and I actually forgot that she was in sales. She was so good at just being so relatable as well. But the content was awesome. What did you sort of take away from it?
Steph was amazing. Like in terms of being able to, I was about to say translate like something that is a pretty out there concept for a lot of people when we're thinking about internationalization, because we're often thinking about spinning up Shopify sites or where we're going to, like what 3PLs we might use or currency conversions. And then to think about it from a customer and a localization perspective is a different perspective that we haven't covered yet. The thing that stood out to me was how important it is to think about it early, like not as an add-on. It's not like create the experience that you love here in Australia or wherever your main market is, and then try and translate it elsewhere, because your point around humor was great. Like it might not translate. So your brand as a total might not translate, let alone your website. So if you are thinking about going down that path, whether it's now or whether it's 5 years' time, you've really got to think, does what we're saying is how we show up? Does that actually translate as a concept into the markets that we might want to be in?
I totally agree. And I thought it was really interesting and good timing, obviously, with everyone being so freaked out and pausing their expansion to the US with everything that's been happening over there. It really does beg the question of okay, why not more of Asia? We're right here. We wouldn't have to change anything really in our logistics to try that, but we just don't, because we know we don't understand the culture. But, there are partners out there who genuinely understand and help you create and execute those concepts. So I think that was one of the biggest takeaways from me was okay, you don't need to have all the answers. And guess what? You probably don't know as much about a English speaking country or market that you thought you did anyway. So why not just go rogue and try another major market in our backyard?
Yeah, the Asian market thing's really interesting. I was expecting Steph to talk a lot about China and hardly mention it. I'm not sure, looking back, I was like, oh, maybe I should ask that question. But it was we didn't talk about China, and maybe it is because of the reliance on mobile apps and the totally different systems and sales channels that we have in this market, whereas probably Japan and Korea are a little bit more aligned, but there's more of a localization issue. But yeah, I tell you what, I'd rather go on business trips to Japan or Korea than the US any day.
Same, and China sometimes.
But also, I really love there that when you think about, TransPerfect, billion-dollar company, and Steph just explaining it we're an agency that just helps people go around the world, and we've got some smart tech behind it. I thought that was a pretty cool way of explaining what they do.
I agree. And I think that was something that I kept thinking about was okay, when you look back at the 30-year-odd journey that TransPerfect has had, they've obviously been very smart to go into different spaces. As they mentioned, there is whole logistics, compliance. There's not just the marketing, advertising. They talked about team, sales training. There's all of this stuff that brands need to think about. And I kept thinking about this is a billion-dollar, not even a billion-dollar industry. This is a billion-dollar business that has kept growing off the back of technology that they keep investing in, that says something. And they've got so many huge Australian brands. Like we just talked about Penfolds, but it's obviously working. A business as like kind of dry as this doesn't keep succeeding and keep growing if it's not delivering massive value to its customers. So yeah, I think it really made me have some grace to myself of where we went wrong in our early days of expanding, but also to realize like, okay, cool. Just because they have massive brands on their website, it doesn't mean there's not a entry point for a smaller scale Aussie New Zealand brand looking to expand as well. So yeah, I honestly feel quite inspired and motivated.
I've got to ask you, and I love that you shared your story. You know, you've got such a hugely successful business, and I think we downplayed it a little bit because we love talking about mistakes. But I've got to ask you, after listening to Steph, what would you do different in your journey knowing what you know now?
That's a really good question. I think two things we would have done different. I definitely think had we have gone to the UK first, it would have been more helpful because like she talked about the tonality, and the tonality is very similar in the UK to Australia. So I think just wrapping our head around expanding would have been easier. But then I would have reached out to them, or at least I would have experimented with an agency in translation and with expansion, with localization, because we did everything but. Like we took on PR agencies, we took on paid marketing agencies, content creators, sales, like we had BDMs on the ground in the US. And looking back, it's like I actually just didn't even think that an agency would exist that was like dedicated to this. I would have thought there was like software as a service, but not kind of hands-on strategic partner that obviously we've learned from TransPerfect today. So yeah, I think that's what I would do differently. And I also think just from my own experience is I would completely have changed our packaging. That really didn't land in the same way in the US that it did in Australia.
Yeah, that came through. That Canada conversation around labeling was fascinating. I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Totally.
Awesome. Rosa, thank you so much for being here. I love our episodes together. It's very special to have you on Add to Cart and come wait for the next one.
Can't wait. See you soon, Bushy.